Hello, my name is Erdem. It's a Turkish name. Can I see any hands from Turkey, if there's anybody? A few people, yes? Almost. I grew up in Istanbul, Turkey, and now live in Copenhagen for about 15, 16 years. I'd like to call myself a social entrepreneur, not only because of Donkey Republic, but also what I've done before and what I'm trying to do after. I'll take about half an hour talking, mostly me, or only me, and then we'll have a little debate, and after 45 minutes the session is over. You have 15-minute break before the next one. So, you're business school students, and this is not really only about business. This is about changing something about society, something about more than just about business. Business can be a part of it. Obviously, Donkey Republic is a business, and let's actually talk about that a little bit. Donkey Republic is and was world's first mobility app where you could rent a bike on an app. The idea I had was in 2012, where I was actually teaching entrepreneurship in Copenhagen. And one of the students in the classroom talked about, when I asked who is the most inspiring entrepreneur for you, he said Uber and Travis. And when I heard their motto, which is everyone should have a private taxi cab, or everyone's private taxi cab, I thought this sounds like dystopia. I live in Copenhagen, and Copenhagen has about 40% modality on bikes, meaning 40% of trips happen on a bike. And in Istanbul, it's the other way around. It was about 70-80% of trips in a car. And same in London and San Francisco, where I lived before, and that is not fun to be in. So I thought, let's think this through. Can we create actually impact business where we make it easier for cities to transition, to get people on two wheels? That's what the name Donkey came around, because I thought we need to be doing some name, some brand that is something that everyone can afford. Not an Uber, but a donkey. And Republic, because it's a movement, it's a community. You identify with something as we are all cyclists sharing the streets in the city. The industry back then, 2015, didn't exist, this word micromobility. Maybe some of you follow it. It actually became a pretty significant industry with a lot of billions now poured into it. Donkey is not the biggest company, but we have led a lot of innovation in the industry, just like the first app and also virtual stations. We also help work a lot with cities like Geneva, making bike share part of public transport. We are also listed in Nasdaq First North. We are the first, I think, listed bike sharing company and have some traction. One of the biggest bike shares in the world. But if I talk a little bit about my journey, Donkey became a full-time project for me in 2015. So I worked on it for about 8 years, 9 years, and I was the CEO until about last year, and transitioned to a new team that is to scale the company that has better experiences in doing so while I go chase the next project that I want to do. I had an engineering degree back in Istanbul, and then I worked a couple of years as a consultant with McKinsey. That was a quite eye-opening experience for me. We were a small team in Istanbul, so I got to work on assignments that were, let's say, an overexposure for me, going to sitting in boardrooms that showed me how the world works. And I didn't want to continue on the business path. I wanted to do something more for society. I could see that already studying engineering. So I took a degree, which I forgot to put here. I took a master's degree in public policy. That was in the US. And after that, I wanted to work in a startup that did something about the world and also trying to bring the triple bottom line, creating impact. The first startup, the social startup that it says here was called MyC4, My Care For, a Danish company that took me also to Denmark, and that was creating microloans for enterprises in Africa. After that, I started my own first startup called Redecide. That was a direct democracy platform for citizen engagement that cities and actually European Liberal Democrat Party, the third biggest party in EU Parliament, have used to create more input from cities on public challenges. Then I worked a couple of years on social impact bonds. It's a construct for public public-private partnerships where the public is paying for outcomes to companies that reach those outcomes. A concept that has, I think, created a lot of new thinking, tackling tough problems like recidivism, which is people coming out of jail, going back to jail, or preventing diabetes. So how do we invest in public goods in innovative ways? And the work I'm trying to do now, Merit Democracy, has a lot to do also with the experiences there and what I've also experienced in Donkey Republic. Also, I wanted to share that I moved around a lot. Istanbul, doing some exchange years, Arizona, Iowa, and some travels. I was in Turkmenistan for a while, and Kuwait, and also spending some time in Nairobi. I mention this because for me, having those experiences, maybe not in the, specifically at the work, but on the street and talking to people, enabled me, I think, to understand different perspectives, different realities in hands-on. Also, I got in the last lecture last week a lot of the question, what would you advise me to do? I'd like to work on this or that project. My first startup job have taught me a lot. It's very different than the consulting world. In the consulting world, there's a lot of concepts and theory, and you don't deliver anything hands-on. There's a lot of exposure. That's also great. But if you think about being an entrepreneur yourself, then one of the things I'd like to recommend to you is to identify some people in companies, maybe less than 50 people in the organization, that are doing something that is interesting to you, and not to focus so much on, the salary or career development opportunities. Actually, in a small company, you get to touch many, many things, and what you get to learn is not what is going to be written on the job contract. You will actually be able to work on challenges that are not there, but that you may be creating. So I learned a lot in that first job, and it enabled me also to have the courage to go for my own startup to start with. And the first social startup we decided, I worked on it for about 2.5 years, and it did not do so well in terms of sales. Also, in its impact, I realized there was a lot of talk, but not real action. The citizen input was not really changing anything. So looking back now, I don't see it as a failure. I see it as a great learning opportunity. And I think that's part of the journey. That's why the curve is sort of ups and downs. Also during Donkey, which is relatively successful, there's been a lot of ups and downs. For example, the COVID period, and a number of times where I was really scared that the company might not make it. So those ups and downs are really part of the journey as an entrepreneur. And I think there are a few points that kept me going. And I want to share those because, I think his words, Steve Jobs, he had a commencement speech in 2005, summarize a lot of those thoughts that I share. And I assume that some of you have seen it. Can I see hands who has already seen this? Okay, there's a few of you. Those who haven't, I really recommend it. If you just Google this, you'll find it. It's about 15 minutes. But one message is don't connect the dots going forward. You cannot really plan ahead. Follow your curiosity. So he's talking about, and that's also, I think, what I did overall, working on things that just, you have a gut feeling that there's something interesting there. When you're having your time to browse the internet, you end up going there and researching more and talking to your friends over a drink about this idea you have. So think about what is really tingling your curiosity and trying to have the courage to discover that more. Loving what you do and actually not settling with something, a profession, until you find what is that thing that you love to do. Because as time goes by, you really create more of an affiliation with that. And for me, it is really about improving public governance. Different things I do, they might succeed or fail, but I can see that they are somehow connecting into that line of thought. How can we make government work better, our collective governance work better? And the last one is that our time is limited. In the context of death, many things seem to matter less and other things matter more. And this also puts, I think, work in perspective. But yeah, I encourage you to put things in the context of that. There's a lot of anxiety going on, whether you're good enough, if your title is good enough, and so on and so forth. And many of those are not really that important or meaningful. So stay hungry, stay foolish, he says, and that's still a message that I share very much. And yeah, that needs a bit of courage in today's world also. A few other learning points before I jump into another topic. The business canvas is something you might have heard of. If you're thinking about creating a new business, you will be introduced to it, the business canvas. The Lean Startup Canvas is an adoption of the business canvas, and it has these sections where you need to think about what problem are you solving, what is your solution, what is your customer, and what is your unique value proposition. In the business canvas, it says your value proposition. In the Lean Startup Canvas, is unique value proposition. And unfair advantage. It's not just your advantage, it's unfair advantage. I want to mark a few of those, and of course, revenue streams and cost and channels and key metrics. The ones I marked are, I think, the ones that really make a difference in the success of a company, early stage company. Key metrics, firstly, how will you measure what your learnings or your success? And if you only focus on the earnings, you might be creating something that earns money early on but cannot scale. Much of the business building is about learnings, not earnings. So make sure that you understand what you're trying to learn and measure those things as your key metrics. If we should give an example at Donkey, we were, for example, we were looking at how to make operations quite lean. Operations can be very costly in a bike sharing business, as you can imagine. So we try to understand, for example, how often we should inflate the tires of the bike. And we try to see how people, the riders, score the bikes if the tire pressure is lower. And from that score, we could project what is the reduced revenue or lost revenue because we are losing customers because the tire pressure is too low. So you can measure a lot of things using data your company might generate, and then from there we could learn how important tire pressure is and decide the schedule for putting pressure on tires accordingly. This is a very small niche aspect of a business, but you can project that to a lot of decisions that you do. Creating key learnings is quite important. Unfair advantage. It's typically something that you know deeply about the industry or a key partnership that your company has that gives you an unfair advantage. For Donkey Republic, it was quite important that we were out of Copenhagen. Copenhagen is known as a cycling city, and we could attract other cities to accept us as a Danish or a Copenhagen company. We also have to work together with important people in industry or mayors also, and try to really adopt the city view in our thinking. At the same time, we use a new emerging technology, which is often the case that businesses scale or use an emerging technology. In our case, that was a new version of Bluetooth that enabled us to make new kind of bike locks that we could make the rental model quite cheap and scalable on the bikes. And unique value proposition. So instead of doing marginal iterations, think about doing more disruptive, bigger changes and iterations. That means also more risk, and oftentimes, especially in Europe, investors have a bit of a difficulty in sort of investing in businesses that are a bit more disruptive. But I would encourage you to go that route because it's simply more interesting over the long run. So yeah, 3 things to think about what you're building your business on: customer trends, consumer trends, or the buyers there. What are they increasingly interested in? In the Donkey case, sharing economy was really becoming a thing, and buying products or services through your phone was really becoming a thing when we started Donkey. Technology I already touched on, and regulation. How will regulation change? Are we going to invest in more bike lanes in the cities? And now we can see it quite clearly, which was not as clear 8 years ago, because of some EU decision post-COVID world, that our cities do need more bike lanes and increased bike modality. And so I feel like we caught a big wave because of this regulatory changes that are coming up. Are they coming fast enough? No. And I'm frustrated about that, and we will talk about that also. But I would encourage you to think about regulation as an enabler of business. Many businesses are not necessarily looking at regulation as an enabler, but you can do that also as a business strategy. Last point, I talked about the key metrics, or how do you learn. One of the key things about thinking about the new business is what will make you of value is your learnings. So customer base, of course, many other things, but think about that Facebook is running about 10,000 experiments any given time. I had heard that number like 4 years ago. And those tests they are running, they called often A/B tests. Sometimes you can hear the word fake door test, but a test is where you're maybe putting a button at a different spot or a different name for something, an action or a page design that is different. For a bike, you can think about a different bike design or inflating the tires at a different pressure, and you're testing something. You're conscious about, you have an idea about how much revenue you might lose if the tires have not as much pressure, and then you basically put some bikes with high tire pressure and some with low tire pressure. That's the build part example. And then you see the results when you measure the data about that. So the learning accounting and running this learning cycle is really crucial for a business, and actually also for a corporate that wants to innovate. And whatever you think about doing, think about what are the most important hypotheses in your potential new venture, and try to learn these hypotheses, true or false, as cheaply as possible and as fast as possible. That, I think, is simply the biggest, the value-adding part. All right. We'll come to the end with some questions, so you can ask me more about that if you're interested. Now, what is important to solve? What problems do we have, and what is important to solve? Before I go to the question to you, and another 15 minutes where I talk about my new project. What motivated me back in time to go into Donkey very much was the mobility challenges. I talked about congestion in cars. Also, air quality is not fun to run in a city with a lot of exhaust around. I don't know how sensitive you are. I'm pretty sensitive to it. Also, we have high or increasing obesity rates. That's true for many North America and many European countries as well. And public space, when you open up public space, a lot of things can happen. There's a lot more quality of city life. A lot of us have experienced that during COVID. So that was really a motivation for me to go in Donkey. And now I realize that an impact business needs to think about even bigger issues. Some call this meta-crisis, but we have a crisis of course, climate change. We have a crisis of biodiversity. We have a crisis about mental health. And we have a large inequality, a global and also national inequality that is creating serious political fractions and extreme movements. And meta-crisis is acknowledging that, the term is acknowledging that these are not independent crises. These crises are connected to the same theme, which is that we have an economic system that has created a lot of wealth and comfort for consumers, but it's misaligned with our collective interest. It is self-terminating, and we have to change it. And tackling them one by one is not necessarily going to work out. We need to change the bigger theme, how the system is set up. One of the topics is that the companies are simply not aligned with the humanities or society's interest. Companies are there to make money, and impact companies are also there to make money first, to survive, they will say so. And yes, they have some impact as a business activity result. But if they have to choose, and when they have to choose, and I tell you, we always have to choose. You choose business. There's no doubt, because you have to first survive. And the markets are set up such that if you prioritize impact too much, there will be others that do it a bit less, and they'll make better business, and they'll replace you. So therefore, you cannot really focus on the impact solely or as a priority, but you'll focus on the return as a company. And it's actually public authority's job. And many of you probably think how boring it is to think about political movements or democracy. It doesn't work or it doesn't move as fast to expect that to solve our challenges. But we don't really have that much of an option because companies can't do it alone. They can be part of the solution, but they need the framing from the public. To give an example, you can think about, and also to think about the externalities. A company like Uber or Donkey, you use a taxi service, you're having a transaction, and it has a lot of externalities. Externalities are external to the transaction. So if you, as the rider, buy the ride from A to B, you are getting that, but you're not paying for the congestion you created in traffic that all the other cars are experiencing. There's emissions, there's public space you took, and there's also a more burdened healthcare system. So those externalities are not accounted for in your transaction, and that's a cost that we all need to face. If you are scrolling on TikTok or Instagram, then that is also documented to have some mental health issues if you do that a lot. And not only for you, but also when you post, also if you're an influencer and you post whatever you consume, and your experience with that has also a lot of influence on other people. And people spending a lot of time on social platforms are having increasing mental health issues and anxieties. So that's also an externality that these platforms are not paying for. You could also talk about clickbait media that is creating less informed citizenship, or you can talk about many other businesses that are creating negative externalities that we don't talk about or they don't pay. And then there are businesses like Donkey that are creating some positive externalities. But at large in scale, businesses that create addiction actually have a great business model. They can use our more our difficulties, if you like, to make a good business out of that. You're eating a lot of candy or smoking cigarettes and so on and so forth. A calculation we did at Donkey could show different modes' impacts on different public effects. And there you can also see some numbers behind what I'm talking about, the externalities and what is external to a transaction, how valuable it is actually for society. And to tell you about the scale of it, a Donkey trip is creating about double the amount that we charge to the rider in public health impacts. So the public health pockets are benefiting twice the amount we charge to the rider, the consumer. If we were getting paid just that or half of that, we would make all bike share free. So the externalities are actually really large, and they're not accounted for. So, but what can we do? Or what can you do? What can I do? I hear a lot of people talk about starting a new company, and that is, I think, there's a lot of inspiring stories. A lot of entrepreneurs that created great companies. Elon Musk doing, Tesla, and that really have changed a lot of things. In Patagonia, look, the guy has really changed our thinking about nature and so on. Yes, there are impact businesses that are able to achieve some impact. And if you're think about yourself as an economic entity, you're a laborer or investor, you can put a labor investor together, you have a company, you can create a new consumer product. I just saw on LinkedIn a female entrepreneur starting a new lingerie brand, which will be made from sustainable materials to reduce the waste and circularity, improve the circularity of that. So yeah, we can create some new businesses. But if you look at the premium that the consumers are willing to pay for impact, for environmental improvements, it's actually quite limited. We could see it in Donkey. There's a lot of research on that. People are willing to pay, maybe 10-20% of consumers are willing to pay 10-20% premium for altruistic benefits. So benefits not to myself, but it's a fair trade product, or there's environmental benefits to it. As a laborer, people want to work in an impact company, but they also want a market salary. Maybe you'll take a few percent points less, but in the long term, an impact company has to pay pretty fair wages as well. And the research on investors show that they are willing to take 1% per annum less in interest or returns in an impact company compared to a non-impact company. That's a difference, but not a big difference, because the interest you pay on your capital expenses are actually a small part of your company's profit and loss. So the big stuff doesn't come from these effects. The big punishment or gain as an impact company doesn't come really from these effects, maybe up to 10% overall effects, I would say. The big effect is what we can do if we reframe the market, and that is through regulation. That is putting our citizenship hat on and changing sort of the framework. I'm not saying it easy. I'm not saying, setting up a new political party, but we have to think about that framework. My current project is about that. It's about really putting the meaning of planet and society into the meaning of money, merging the consumer comfort to your effects as a business in one. And to do that, actually to create a part of the company's P&L where you would account for your environmental impacts and your social impacts in monetary terms. This is the donut economics donut, if you haven't seen that before. And essentially, you're taking the social effects and environmental effects, which are to be priced by public authorities and maybe paid for by public authorities and detractors of impact. A version of this is already alive with CO2 markets. Companies emitting CO2 or greenhouse gases are paying if they are emitting too much over their cap, and companies that are emitting less are gaining that. So essentially, this idea is to expand that to other metrics or public metrics that we care about. Could be in biodiversity, mental health, and so on and so forth. To do so, engaging public authorities as buyers of impact, and we can aggregate their interest in creating these impacts and create impact markets. So think about making people mobile actively. That would be a metric that we can measure. Fewer car trips, more bike trips, a metric that we can measure. Or a metric of dining more healthy, that is a metric that we can measure. Are some public investment opportunities where cities and regions would put in some money, and companies that can achieve those targets, whatever businesses that they are running, can trigger those monies. Because these are public goods, and we are creating more public goods, so why should companies not benefit from doing so? I call this impact markets, and the eventual picture I'd like to see is that we have a similar picture of CO2 markets where companies are paying for their negative impacts and gaining for their positive impacts from funds where our authorities, our democratic institutions are helping price what we want and how much we value it. In one meeting in Stockholm, an architect said that the metric that he would like to design a city around is how safe kids feel on the streets. So that would be the metric for him to go after. And what would be the value of a kid, let's say 7-year-old kid, being able to run around in a city street? What is the value of that? We can take other metrics, of course, but when architects talk about, and real estate companies also look into what customers are really happy about in a real estate, nobody is bringing up cars on the streets. They want to have green space, they want to have clean air, they want to have little noise and experience of nature. But we end up where we are, also in Geneva. So we do need to change, I think, the nature of business and incentives, and we need to engage our public authorities to both create the business incentives and also the frameworks to get there. Okay, that was my part. I want to pose a question, and then I want you to take this in groups of 2 or 3, and then we'll have a little debate. There's a lot of talk about impact, and my presentation is also hopefully evoking some questions in you about that. And I also like the Stoic philosophy. If you haven't heard of it, I recommend to have a look at what Stoicism means. But the meaning of life is serving humanity, and we all need to find our unique way to do that. So I'd like you to talk about what mission do you derive energy from or find meaning in? And the other question is, who should we give power to decide what is positive impact? So two separate questions. What do you derive meaning from? And who should we give the power to define what positive impact is? I'd like you to make groups of 2 or 3, and you'll have 2 or 3 minutes to talk, maybe 4 minutes to talk about these two questions, then we talk together. All right? Go. Okay. All right. Thank you for your lively engagement. Let's go back to, let's wrap it up. Thank you for your lively engagement. That's great. Okay. I'd like to share maybe 3, 5 of those who want to talk about the first one. What mission do you get meaning from? Can I see any hands? If anyone who wants to share? Nobody? Yes, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So basically, what mission would you get a meaning from?
Right.
And if I correctly understood the question, then what determines the mission in my life?
Yes.
Like, and when I get a meaning of the mission.
Right.
And for myself personally, the mission that I have is like from few points. First of all, is I need.
Let's take one.
Oh,
We
no.
have time for one.
Okay, I will be very fast. I need to succeed my goals without breaking my principles. So this one is my missions.
Okay. Thank you. Having integrity. That sounds like a great goal. Anybody else would like to share? You there? Just go up. I think we can hear you. I'll repeat what you say.
Yes, so exactly, if I understood the question correctly, but me and my colleague Leon were discussing. So one of the things, Leon, stand up. One of the things we discussed is like topic you mentioned. So the childs are like can freely walk around the city, and nothing will happen to them. So like solving the issue with safety on streets, it's important. I think it's like a one of the missions that not very common, because if we say like improve.
You feel connected to this mission?
Yeah, I feel
Great.
connected.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was good. Anybody else? Just shortly. Something you feel great? Yes.
I think expanding your power.
Expanding the power.
Expanding your power, yeah.
Whose power?
Like, to get more powerful, get stronger.
Physical.
No. I mean, like, the most CEOs, they're trying to get more power.
Okay. So what gives you meaning is expanding your wealth or influence or both?
Both. So that's what I mean by the power.
Okay. Good. I try to... yeah? Okay. Yeah. So the meaning of life being serving humanity, if you agree or disagree with that, but that's sort of the Stoic philosophy. Obtaining that power is not on its own serving humanity, right? It serves maybe you in having a lot of influence, but the power can also be used in ways that can impact us in humanity negatively as well. So I'd like to encourage you to think about how do you want to use that power, and actually also in general, you'll end up creating businesses or having a job, and maybe you'll compare it about the salary and so on. But I think this question is more important in the long haul, like loving what you do and what gives meaning to you, and finding ways to make that into a business if it can be in that direction. Now let's move on to the second question, which is who should we give the power to decide what is positive impact? Because there's a lot of discussion about that. Companies claim their own positive impact. There's academics talking about it. Maybe politicians talk about it. Who should be having that power? Go ahead.
Yeah, so basically the conclusion I was arriving by talking to my friend Pavanello is that essentially, because I believe, more so speaking, everyone is responsible or needs to be held accountable in a certain way, because in a macro sense of who is responsible for power, like if you think about it, like every state always strives, like their whole idea of a state, like as an entity, is to have power in order to guarantee their survival, right? So because we live in an environment that's always like with conflict, we do not live in like a fully peaceful way. There's not like authority, like higher authority that governs everyone that says this is how things should be. So therefore, because we understand that everyone seeks power, right? Like that's the whole purpose. Like they want to survive, and how they do this? Like this is why we have conflicts. But therefore, I believe that that's why everyone should be held accountable in a certain way, and yeah, that's why governments exist. They have their own like. Everyone has their own like ideas of how we should create positive impact, but
Right.
everyone in theory should be willing to participate. That's what it means to live in like under a democratic society.
Okay. Everyone should have their right to claim what impact is what I understand you say. Is there any other people who want to share their opinion about this? Let's go there.
So for power, we have, for each individually, we have our circle of control and our circle of concern. So circle of concern could be, for example, climate change. We can't directly control climate change, each of us as individuals, but what we can control is our response to external factors. So if everyone aligns with what they can, and for corporations as well, if they're able to control their corporate social responsibility, which my teammate mentioned, yeah, little by little we'll be able to move towards the circle of concern.
So everyone, again, for themselves should decide what the impact is. Okay. Anybody else with other thoughts? Yes, over there.
So for this question, I think it's kind of vague and broad. For the purpose, I think it depends exactly on the people or group that's being impacted. So therefore, let's say if, you know, a business is claiming like, hey, this is doing great for the people in, I don't know, Mexico. I think it's important for the people in Mexico to actually decide, yeah, it's good or no,
Individually
it's not.
or collectively?
Well, I guess it depends how like niche it is and what, like, because in Mexico or any country or in anywhere, there's people, different levels, you know, it's really hard to generalize. So you kind of just have to very identify who it's serving and if it is a positive or a negative in that sense.
Okay, thank you for that. To wrap it up, these questions, my point is that we have our individual hat, and we should all have a think about how do we want to give, to the world in our understanding of the world. So how do we serve humanity? But if we all individually think about what we think is positive impact, we are not able to understand the complexity in the world, and we might also go in very different directions. And we do need the authorities to create some kind of guideline or understanding and coordination for the collective to achieve the goals that we need. And for that, I think we do need to figure out a better way of governance, or a governance that we are respecting. So we're talking about, it could be a governance of a city, when we're talking about cities' public goods, or a government of a country, or a regional or global governance. But absent this collective expression, we have a difficulty in deciding what is positive impact. One example is Canadian tar sand companies, oil companies were selling oil in a commercial in 2012. They were saying that they would be replacing the Saudi oil, which was violating human rights. That's what they said in their commercial. And the US gun rights advocates would also say that they are making the country safer. So if we think individually, we can have very different ideas about what is positive impact. So we do need some kind of collective agreements, and therefore the need for the governance and the structures that create those frameworks for companies and individuals. That was to provoke you a little bit, and I think we got that. Do you have any questions for me? We have, I think, about 5 minutes if we want to take any questions. Let's go with you.
So, can you hear me? Yeah. So initially you mentioned that the main...
Sorry, let's start with him and then we'll continue. Go ahead.
So initially you mentioned that first when you were doing the bicycle thing, right, you were targeting one single issue. And then you said that the most important part is that all the issues are combined. Right?
Connected,
you have
yes.
the mental and everything is connected, of course.
Yeah.
And it leads to the issue of the economic system.
Yes.
And in the current world economic system, even if we have positive impact businesses, right, at the end of all, in a capitalist system, it's still pro-money.
Yes.
Especially with the US economic system, when you're creating value out of money itself instead of intrinsic value of production.
Right.
And in that case, even with CO2 emissions, as you putting them on the balance sheet, right, there is no intrinsic value. It's just a paper value. So the problem comes back to the system we live in, both economically and politically, as with decision making, right? There were people who mentioned that decisions should be individual or decisions done collectively.
Right.
And there has to be something in between, which leads to a single system that it can be done in, which is socialism.
I don't know how you connected the two. I don't necessarily agree with, I don't know what you mean with socialism. We put a lot of words into meaning, but
what I'm trying to say is that while we are in a capitalist system and all the business decisions are done pro money and for money, and even linking social impact to money, it's still a part of the wrong ideology where you don't have the collective thinking of better for humanity, because it's still all individual based, right? Even in terms of regulations and governments making the regulations, you still have the human factor of personal and private interest, right? With the example that was brought in about power.
Thank you. I think I understand. I think I agree with you that we need social welfare. I think what I described here, which is converting or pricing social and environmental values and putting that into businesses' P&L, would create the kind of world that we want. I think it's creating a better version of capitalism, closer to what I think you think of as socialism. I think socialism where all the welfare is brought by a central top-down government and then private sector is running its own show on the side is not functioning well. I'm living in Denmark for 15 years. They have one of the most socialist system, but they're also breaking apart because the government is not able to cope with the complexity of private sector and technology changing. So we need to think smarter ways to internalize externalities and change business models and achieve socialism in a different way. But yeah, great comment that that it's the system that needs some change. Back there. We have room for one or two questions. Let's see.
Just a quick response to the conversation that was going on here before. If we look at the example of Rwanda, who's got zero plastic at the moment, and looking at Switzerland that can't even do it, that's an interesting example of where we can actually override the form of entrepreneurial activities through a government's investment in laying down certain laws and saying, stop, we've got to do this now. And it was accepted by the people because they were educated into the system, and other people didn't degenerate on productivity or capitalism. Actually, people found new ways to make money that were safer and better for our planet. So
thank you for that comment. Actually, it gets to the heart of what I'm talking about. There's a lot of opportunity for businesses or impact businesses to flourish if the government is pricing negative externalities negatively and positive externalities positively. So if you make it expensive to use plastic bags, then there will be business case for doing something else for it. So it's not only about business doing whatever they want to do. That will not serve humanity's best interest. It's not about just government deciding what should be done. Government are collective expression, pricing what is valuable and not, and then letting markets and capital solve the problems. At least that's what I think. There's room for one final question or comment. Your hand was up first. Yes, let's take two then. Let's start here.
Okay, thank you very much. I was just thinking, is there, like a reason to define like a success of a company? Because we tend to focus more of like how profitable it is, other than looking at the good things that maybe this company is having in the society, the good impact, and then we forget, we tend to hype the companies that generate a lot of money.
Right.
Yeah. Do we need to redefine the success of a company?
Thank you for that. I think there's, of course, the ESG reporting, environmental, social, and governance reporting, and we had corporate social responsibility reporting. Those things are separate to the company's financial reporting. And there might be a lot of images and talk about how the company is benefiting society. But, when in truth, what matters for investors, employees, is if the company is making money and in selling a lot. So many companies that create great reports might not be in business just because they create the impact, because we're not pricing those things. And I think there's a beauty in simplifying things in one currency. So instead of having two reports, one about the business, one about your ESG or CSR, bring them together, express them in one value, which we call, you know, euros or dollars or franc or whatever you want, but money. So we should be able to convert that so that there's only one thing that matters, and only businesses that benefit society flourish, and businesses that don't have to shut down. So in the current structure, if you're making money, if you're bringing comfort to consumers, that's the only focus, then you're successful. And we're lacking the other part in the P&L. Last comment, and then we wrap it, we finish it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Anderson. I just wanted to bring it back to your previous project, Donkey.
Yes.
What was the key metric you saw that was showing you that the company would eventually do quite well and scale to a certain extent?
Great. Retention and word of mouth. We were able to acquire more customers fast because we were not spending much money in marketing, but there was happy customers that were talking about their experience. So customer acquisition cost was low, and a big generator was word of mouth. And secondly, retention rates. So a customer would come back, and that rate was actually rather high compared to whatever we could find in comparable industries. Yeah. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ovacik. Okay, guys, 5 minutes break. You have 5 minutes to go out if you need to go to the toilets. I want to see you all back here at 6 sharp so that we can continue. All of you need to be back.